Hello and thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Bite-Sized Cybercrime, the podcast where we discuss cybercrimes and cybersecurity news. This week we will be talking about a new attack developed by the threat actors known as Poison Seed that is able to bypass FIDO-based protections. That was slightly sarcastic and we'll see why. But I think the first thing I should do is explain what exactly FIDO is, because it is not a dog. FIDO stands for First Identity Online, and it is the set of open standard authentication protocols that are intended to be used without ever using a password. Instead, FIDO uses security keys stored on a specific device, or things like biometric authentication. It's supported by a lot of operating systems like Windows and Android, as well as most web browsers like Google, Chrome, Firefox, Edge, and Safari. I personally use FIDO-based authentication on my phone, which uses my fingerprint to authenticate me to a lot of applications instead of using a password. FIDO is typically associated with physical security keys, although I do see mobile phones becoming those security keys in the future quite frequently, as you can sort of already do this with Android, which is, like I said, what I do. It is an improvement on passwords, which leaves a ton of room for human error. However, FIDO is still not perfect and can be exploited. So let's get into the details of the attack. Expel, a cybersecurity firm, not to be confused with Excel, the spreadsheet software, observed an attack created by Poison Seed, and it starts off the way many cyber attacks do. A good old-fashioned phishing email. The email takes you to a fake Okta sign-in page. Okta is an identity and access management company that acts as a central hub for managing the identity of people at an organization. It enables single sign-on and multi-factor authentication as well. You may be familiar with them if you've worked at a place or used a product that integrates Okta into their identity management. If you try to log into this fake Okta page, you will be redirected to a fake AWS link. When you log in, initially a QR code pops up on the screen. This code urges you to use the cross-device sign-in feature of FIDO. This is actually a thing that happens with FIDO authentication on a device you haven't logged into before, especially if your keys are stored not on that device. What is basically happening is the attacker is using your credentials to log into the real Okta under your real identity in real time, and was stopped because FIDO was presenting this QR code asking for the cross-device sign-in permission. The attacker is just passing along the same QR code for you to use. It is simulating the full experience of legitimately logging in with FIDO and multi-factor authentication, as you would normally do. This doesn't seem any more unusual than any other login activity, so a user wouldn't really suspect a thing. However, you probably should suspect a thing if this is your work device that you've used before. If it recognizes your device, this shouldn't be something that is prompting, though if you've seen it before, it still may not seem that suspicious at all. Notably, this is not a flaw within the FIDO framework itself. It's just a clever way of stealing credentials and getting around security measures. There are other measures that you can put into place to prevent this type of attack as well, thankfully. You can enable cross-device sign-in to require Bluetooth connection between the mobile device and the unregistered machine. This would entirely prevent the attack from happening at all, as Bluetooth is a short form of communication. It can't be passed over the internet like a QR code can, so the attacker would have no way of getting that Bluetooth signal if they're even, over 50 feet away, let alone likely in a whole other country on a whole different continent. Another important note is that this would typically fail anyways due to fake Okta and real Okta not having the same domain names. FIDO would see that you put your credentials into fake Okta, but that the MFA request came from real Okta, and it should reject the communication based on that mismatch. So what we can conclude here is that this isn't actually bypassing FIDO itself. Rather, it's actually downgrading the form of multi-factor authentication to a weaker version that doesn't see through that flaw as easily. In modern implementations, this just wouldn't really work. Notably, geographic restrictions could also prevent this attack from occurring, and if your organization only buys one brand of FIDO key, such as from Yubico, you can restrict requests from outside of that manufacturer. FIDO is a powerful authentication tool that I think has a ton of potential, and I would love to see more websites operating systems, applications adopt it. But like anything else, you have to be careful about the way it's implemented, and make sure it is configured as securely as possible at your organization to avoid novel phishing attacks like this one. I don't want this episode to scare you from using FIDO or other passwordless authentication methods. It may seem unconventional or strange, but they are genuinely a lot more secure, and once you get used to them, they're honestly a lot less of a pain to use. You don't have to memorize a bunch of different passwords. You just have your key, and it works. Implemented correctly, I find FIDO authentication to be incredibly smooth and user-friendly. Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Bite-Size Cybercrime, and another thanks to Expel for their initial blog post, as well as Dark Reading and ARS Technica for reports and some further insights into how this attack works. I would especially like to thank ARS Technica for their observations that this is in fact a multi-factor authentication downgrade attack rather than a genuine FIDO bypass attack, which I have seen falsely reported quite a few times. Anyways, until next time, stay secure.